Hi Team 23, it's Ms. Caswell and I'm getting ready to do some more baking. I've been reading this book by a well-known chef and she shares some stories and some cooking advice and some recipes. And this recipe caught my eye. It is for fresh ginger molasses cake. Just sounds delicious. The only problem is it makes a 2-layer cake, and that's a lot of cake if you only have 2 people living in your house. So I'm thinking I could solve this problem by just making half the recipe. Then I'd have a 1-layer cake, and that's a much more reasonable size. So when we talk about halving a recipe, it means that we take each ingredient, we split it into 2 equal parts. Those are called halves, and we only use one of the parts. Before I keep going, 3rd graders who are in my math group or Mrs. Fry's math group, your assignment on Google Classroom is to do this math yourself. That's right. You need to go to Google Classroom right now before you keep watching this video. Yep, hit the pause button. I mean it, really. Hit the pause button and go do this on your own. Then come back, watch the rest of the video, and see if you were correct. So, some of these ingredients aren't going to be too tricky, right? Like 2 large eggs. Well, if I put those into 2 equal groups, I have 1 egg in each group. And then I just use 1 of the eggs. A cup of ginger, if I need half of that cup, well, I'm just going to use a half cup, right? So that's not too tricky either. But there are a few ingredients that I'm thinking I might need a drawing to help me figure out. Like 2 1/3 cups of flour, a half teaspoon of cloves, and a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. Those are a little bit trickier. So I'm going to use some models to help me. I've got a drawing of a rectangle, and I've got a drawing of a number line. Sometimes people like to show fractions with circles too, but I just find that that's really hard to partition into equal groups. So I tend to use rectangles instead. So let's start with the half teaspoon of cloves. All right, first thing we're going to do is we're going to show what the original recipe is calling for, a half teaspoon. We're going to show a half up here. We're going to pretend this whole is a teaspoon, and we're going to show half of it. That means we're going to divide it into 2 equal groups. I think I can partition it with a line right here down the middle. Yeah, and there I have 2 equal groups. This over here is 1/2, and then over here is another half. 2 halves make a whole teaspoon. Okay, so in the original recipe, I would use this amount. I would use 1/2, but I want to use half of that half. I want to divide this half into 2 equal groups and just use 1 of those parts. Okay, so let's see. I think I'm ready to do some more partitioning then. I guess right again, like if I just draw a line right down the middle, there we go. That's 2 equal parts, right? But I don't know what fraction it is because I don't have equal parts over here. And if I am trying to figure out a fraction, those parts have to be equal. So I have to partition on this side also. There we go. Now those parts all look equal. So now I can count them and figure out what fraction I have. So how many parts do you see? 1, 2, 3, 4. When I have 4 equal parts, what fractions am I talking about? Yeah, those are fourths. And I write it like this. This is a 1/4. This is 1/4. This is 1/4. And this over here is another fourth. It takes 1, 2, 3, 4 fourths to make the whole. So if I'm using just half of what the original recipe calls for, a half teaspoon, that's going to be just this part over here. I'm going to use 1/4. I can show that on a number line also. It's very similar. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I'm showing my original amount. So I'm showing half teaspoon. Okay, so again, I need to partition my number line into 2 equal parts. A line down the middle should do it. Yep, that part and that part. Do you see the 2 equal parts? So this line right here is halfway. It's 1/2. This over here is 2 halves. When I get all the way to the whole, it's 2 halves. So now I then need to partition this half into 2 equal parts, right? Into halves. So a line down the middle right here should do it. Yeah, those 2 parts look equal. But now this one isn't over here. So now I also need to partition this side. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 equal parts on my number line. So if I go from here to here, that's 1/4. Then if I keep going, 1 2/4. Keep going, 1 2 3/4. 1 2 3 4/4 is the same as the whole. That matches what I have up here, doesn't it? It took 4/4 to make the whole rectangle. The original recipe called for half a teaspoon. If I'm going to use half of that half, I'm going to use 1/4. Okay, so now I know how many cloves. Let's try black pepper. Black pepper, the original recipe calls for 1/4. So let's show that in our rectangle to start. How many parts am I going to need? Yeah, 4 equal parts, right? That's what that denominator tells me. So let's see. I like to go down the middle first, and then the other 2 sides. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 equal parts. Those are fourths. And the original recipe, that numerator shows me that I only need 1 of those fourths. Just 1/4 in the original recipe. That's how much I would need if I'm making the whole cake. But I'm not making the whole cake. I'm making half of the cake. So I need to divide this 1/4 into half. Okay, so that means 2 equal parts. A line right here, I think should do it. That looks pretty good. But what do you notice? Yeah, now these parts are not equal to those. I have to keep partitioning my rectangle. Again, and again, and one more time. Wow, that's a lot of parts. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 equal parts means I have 8ths. Here's an 8th. Here's an 8th. Here's an 8th. And another 8th. And another 8th. And another 8th. And another 8th. So this shaded part showed the 4th that the original recipe called for. I'm only going to use half of that 4th. How much am I going to use? Yeah, just 1/8. So instead of using a 4th teaspoon, I'm going to use an 1/8 teaspoon. Here's how it would look on the number line. same idea, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 equal parts to start. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 1 is the same as 4/4. But I want half of 1/4, so I'm going to partition that fourth into 2 equal parts. Then I need to keep partitioning down my number line to keep all the parts equal. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parts, which means what I need is 1/8. Okay, this is good progress. Okay, let's try this one. This one is pretty tricky because it's what's called a mixed number. It has a whole number and it has a fraction. So I've drawn 3 rectangles. So let's show what the original recipe calls for. So it calls for 2 cups of flour. Each rectangle is showing me a full cup. So I'm going to need 2 full cups if I make the original recipe. I would need 2 full cups, and then I would need 1/3 of a cup. Okay, so we need to partition this rectangle. How many pieces? Yeah, 3 equal pieces or equal parts, because the denominator tells me that. All right, so let's see, I think right here and here should give me 3 equal parts. And then the original recipe calls for 1 of those thirds. So the original recipe asks for 2 whole cups and 1/3 of a cup. All right, so I guess if I'm going to divide this into half, if I'm only going to use half of this, well, then I would just use 1 of these full cups, right? I could get rid of 1 cup and just use one full cup. And then I would need to split this third into 2 equal groups. Right, so let's do that. And now we keep partitioning until we have equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 equal parts. What do I have now for fractions? Yeah, 6. 1/6, 1/6, 1/6, 1/6, 1/6, and 1/6. How many of them does it take to make a whole cup? Yeah, 6 of them, right? So if I'm going to use half of this third, how much am I going to use? Yeah, I'm going to use just one of these 6ths. So I divided the 2 into halves, and that gave me 1 full cup. And I divided the third into half, and that gave me 1/6 of a cup of flour. There, that's it. I think I'm ready for baking. Now the fun begins. And this time, I'll actually make a video and show you how the baking goes.